Hey everybody out there, it's Pastor John with your Midweek Reflection. This is my first time doing YouTube Live, so hopefully this goes all right. We are getting into the fifth commandment this week, and the fifth commandment is honor your father and mother. And by the way, I don't know if I've mentioned this on Sundays, but not everyone counts the commandments the same. So if you're in the Catholic Church, you're like, wait, honor your father and mother is the fourth commandment, not the fifth commandment, and you'd be right. But generally in the Protestant tradition, we have gone with that honor your father and mother is the fifth commandment, and it's just a matter of how certain different commandments are combined, basically, is the difference. But anyway, so we're looking at the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. And as I was reading this week, I had this moment. And every so often when I'm preparing a message, I have these kinds of moments in which I will be reading a text through one set of eyes or assumptions, and then something flips. And I realize, wait a second, that lens, those assumptions, those aren't from the text, they're from somewhere else. And if we've been in the church long enough, probably a lot of us have these lenses, where we've been taught a certain text, or even just not even that text, but how we've been taught the Bible, to read the Bible, influences how we read a particular text, scripture. And sometimes we have to really look at those assumptions and those lenses that we're seeing with. This week for me, it was seeing the fifth commandment through the lens of picturing a situation where a parent is telling a child something to do. And I think a lot of us have this image of the fifth commandment as being about behavior and obedience and authority. And I'm not so sure that's exactly what it's meant to be about. I realize that that's not from the text itself. That's from my own assumptions about it. And generally, sometimes that's like our assumptions about what parenting is. So that's where that lens comes from, is that parenting is about getting your children to do what you tell them to do. And so as I was thinking, though, about the circumstances of the Hebrew people in Deuteronomy, so they're wandering through the desert, heading into the promised land, and so on, and the context of Jewish tradition and what parenting is, and all of these things, I realized, wait a second, this is off. Because if you read Deuteronomy around the fifth, Deuteronomy 5, where we find the Ten Commandments, you do find some instruction for parents about what it means to parent their children, and those are all wrapped up in passing along the story of the Exodus and the wisdom of God that God is sharing through the Torah, through the instruction that he's giving. And so it turns out that I think the fifth commandment is best read in the context of, or the best thing we can picture when we think about the fifth commandment is a Jewish family sitting around the table at Shabbat, telling the story of the Exodus and passing along the wisdom of God. And so that's the context of parenting. That what we're doing as parents is raising up our children in the freedom story of God. That we have a God who hears our cries, who desires our liberation and works our liberation, and who loves us. And that is what we want to raise our children in. That is the story, that is the ethos that we want to build in our homes. Not that we have a God who just wants to manage our behaviors and keep us doing the moral or proper thing. Obviously, that has a place in parenting. Like we teach our kids manners and those type of things. But the greater purpose of parenting is to raise our kids in that ethos of God's liberation and love. And to honor our parents then is less, and again, we want our kids to listen to us and do what we say. Like when I say to my kid, do your homework, I want them to do their homework, right? Like that's fine. But I think we need to read the command within that context of how are my kids, how are we receiving the wisdom and love of our parents? How are we living into the story that they're telling us about who we are as a family or as Christians, or whatever the case may be? How are we receiving them as human beings? Not just when we're children, but when we're adults and our parents are getting older. How are we receiving our parents? How are we giving weight to them, which is what to honor means, is to give weight to something. And so I'd encourage you this week to think about your own lenses through which you read honor your father and mother, and consider whether changing the lens. You think about the optometrist. If you go to the optometrist and they flip those lenses, right? They'll be like A or B, C or D, right? Picture yourself having your lens of the fifth commandment flipped a little bit, and see how that impacts how you understand it. And we'll talk more about it on Sunday. As always, I look forward to worshiping with you as we live the gospel life together. Until then, may God bless you.